and good evening to everyone. I'd like to welcome again all of you to Vestry Orientation. My name is Miguel Escobar, and I serve as a Managing Program Director here at the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy weeks and busy schedules to attend tonight's event. We have people joining us from all around the country, and if you haven't already, please write into the chat box, which is on the lower right-hand side of the screen, where you are joining us from tonight. My colleague and I are joining you from the Episcopal Church Foundation offices in New York. In fact, this is the last time we will be joining you from this particular office, as we will very shortly be moving to a different space. But again, please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat box on the lower right-hand side of the screen. I would love to just also say a few words about what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. The Episcopal Church Foundation is an independent, lay-led organization founded in 1949, whose mission is to strengthen congregations through vision and planning, leadership development, and financial resources for ministry. We have a variety of programs here at ECF. In all three of those areas, but one of the most important things that we do is what we're doing right now, which is we provide online education for free for congregations throughout the church. We have 4 impacts that we're working toward. You can read them on the screen, and those just tell us, are we, being successful in our vision and our hope. So. Finally, just again introducing ourselves as presenters. My name is Miguel Escobar, I'm Managing Program Director here at ECF. I am an Episcopalian. Member of Grace Brooklyn Heights, and very happy to be here and to be presenting tonight's workshop. And Brendan, you are on mute.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Brendan Hunter. I am an Associate Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation, a member of St. Mary the Virgin in New York City. And my background is in congregational ministry, having served in a congregation as a director of administration, as well as much work with diocesan work in convention and communications, as well as campus and young adult ministries, having worked with vestries in many different capacities in all these different roles. And very excited to join you this evening and look forward to your questions.
So let's begin with prayer. So let's just take a moment. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wilder seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen. So that is a prayer from Sir Francis Drake, and we hope that it's a good beginning and prayer for us as we start vestry service for this wonderful and hopefully wild sea of a new year. So in terms of this presentation, there are 4 general sections that we're going to be speaking about. The first is the role of the vestry. What is it that vestries do and where does that come from? Secondly, we're going to be digging into key vestry responsibilities, everything from discernment of mission and vision to identifying new leaders, to fiduciary responsibilities, as well as responsibilities in the area of property management. Then we're going to move toward just some practical tools and resources for new vestry leaders as you begin your year of service. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up by talking about practical next steps, trying to take all this information that we've covered and naming just a few next steps that vestries can take in the coming months. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Brendan.
Great. Thanks, Miguel. So to kick things off, you may be wondering why there is an image of an armoire on this slide on your screen. And just want to give you a quick snapshot of the history of where we get our current vestry structure. Again, and I emphasize very brief and abridged version, so do bear with me with that. Basically, our vestry structure does come from the English Church. In the Church of England, historically, the annual elections of church wardens would take place during Easter week, and it was a pretty simple process. All adult landowning male parishioners would crowd into the room where clergy would robe, this being the vestry, or where those folks gathered would hear the accounts of the past church wardens and to then elect their successors. Fast forwarding quite a bit and jumping across the pond, in Virginia, parishes had become so large that it was just physically impossible to crowd all of the voting members into one room. So there was developed a practice to elect 12 representatives, and these 12 representatives were elected for life. So do take note that we know that there are many folks out there in the church that have served for many, many years, but we're all probably very thankful that it is no longer a custom that you're appointed for life. And we've also come to expand our understanding of who can have that voice and vote. It's not just adult male members now who can be elected and serve on the vestry. Of course, we have men and women on the vestry today, and depending upon your specific diocesan canons, in some cases and with certain provisions, youth can also be elected to serve on the vestry or to have representation on your vestry, perhaps with voice and not vote. Today, vestries, just to give a snapshot of the basic structure in most congregations, again, we're giving a broad definition for you. Most parishes elect vestry members at an annual meeting. For many congregations, this takes place at the beginning of the calendar year. Many of you may be having your annual meetings taking place later this month at the end of January. Vestries will range in size, though typically are between 6 and 12 members, depending upon the size of your congregation. That's typically what tends to determine the size of your vestry. In many smaller congregations, the vestry has been trimmed down. Especially recently, we've seen this trend that vestries will reduce in size so that, quite frankly, it's not a whole entire third of your congregation that needs to be on the vestry, and also to make it easier to find other members of the vestry to be able to rotate on while others are able to rotate off. The rector of the parish is the presiding officer of the vestry, but that's also not to say that they need to lead all vestry meetings. The former bishop of the Diocese of Texas, Claude Payne, advises rectors to consider training their senior warden or other trusted members of their vestry to facilitate the regular meetings. In Bishop Payne's words, this allows rectors to focus on the matter at hand rather than how well the meeting is being run, to be able to note body language and to be able to intervene if and when necessary. On most vestries, and there are cases, there might be a bishop's committee if it's a mission congregation, you will have 2 wardens. In vestries, typically this is referred to as the junior warden and senior warden, or perhaps the people's warden and the priest warden. In a bishop's committee, it might be a different term as well. Again, it tends to vary between diocesan, local custom, and region. But again, these particular individuals are charged with supporting the rector throughout their term in his or her ministry. In some parishes, it's a custom for the junior warden to have special responsibility over church properties and the buildings and grounds, and as well as treasurers and clerks. These individuals may be appointed in some cases. They may be elected to your vestry. This again varies depending upon the makeup of your bylaws and your customs. So that's some basic principles that are common to most vestries. But what is it that vestries do? The Episcopal Church Foundation sees the role of the vestry in 4 parts that you can see here on your screen. While often there's almost an exclusive emphasis on stewardship on a congregation's property and finances, we at ECF strongly believe that a vestry holds a key role in first discerning where God is calling your congregation in your particular location and at this particular point in time, and how your community is being called to live out the gospel in your particular time and place. Second, we see it is vital to be working with your clergy to articulate a shared mission, vision, and strategic plan for your congregation that responds to God's call in your community at this particular point in time. Third, that vestries have an important role in identifying new leaders for both the congregation and for the wider church. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. And finally, vestries are the legal representatives of the congregation for all matters pertaining to the corporate property, and thus do have a special responsibility related to property, finance, human resources of your congregation. We're going to explore each of these in more detail shortly, but at this moment I'd like to take a look at the church-wide canons and underscore the responsibilities that you do have therein. And as you can see, and I think a very interesting, perhaps quirky thing, is that our church-wide canons actually have very little to say about the purpose and organization of a parish vestry. So here is the list, and this is it. And you'll see, broadly speaking, the first 2 bullet points relate to making sure that a congregation is being a good steward of property and finances, whereas the second 2 relate to identifying religious leadership. Vestries do play a particularly important role in times of clergy transition and in nominating people for holy orders. As we noted from the previous slide, and that what we at ECF feel is missing from this description, however, is the important role that vestries do have in discerning God's call to the congregation and in developing a mission and vision and strategic vision in response to this call. More and more, we do believe that vestries are called to partner with their clergy in leading the congregation in a complex and quite frankly challenging time. And these are very challenging times for many Episcopal congregations. In January of 2014, ECF completed a series of surveys asking Episcopal congregational leaders to identify those areas that they were in most need of help currently and what they were going to be needing the most help in looking 6 months down the road. Not surprisingly, the topic of stewardship was the area that most people felt the most concern with immediately, whereas vision and planning was by and far the most area of importance vestries considered when looking down the road. Interestingly, I would note for you, both of these areas hinge on what we at ECF consider to be a strategic role for the vestry, namely that in identifying a hopeful vision of the future in which a congregation can rally behind and generate gifts of time, talent, and treasure. And when we take a wider view, looking at our civic and cultural landscape, we again see the importance of the vestry as a strategic thinking leadership body. Today, Episcopal congregations, as this should come as no surprise to pretty much all of you, are facing many external forces that are requiring them to reimagine their roles and take risks in important ways. I just want to highlight a few things. Again, you'll get a copy of the slides and you can read over this later. And just like to emphasize for you that the average Sunday attendance in the Episcopal Church actually is now down to 60. The 2014 statistics just published recently with that is now at 60. So when considering size and small church, 60 is the bulk of what is out there these days. An increased reliance on the necessity for effective lay leaders at the congregational and diocesan level. More and more congregations are relying on part-time, quarter-time, even on non-stipend, not having a clergy person at all. And so we're looking at having to figure out ways of what it means for congregations that have been used to a one priest, one parish model. The increase in Latino and other ethnic or multicultural congregations, and also the significant generational differences in giving patterns and commitment to stewardship. All of these are just terribly important for us to be taking a look at in terms of what we are doing.
Okay, so we're going along quite nicely. I'm wondering if we could just take a pause for a moment, and if anyone has a question about what Brendan just covered before we jump into going into more detail about key vestry responsibilities. If you do have a question or comment, you can type into the chat box on the lower right-hand side of the screen. So as we wait, I see someone's typing out. Let me circle back in just a moment. So was attendance 50 or 60? It's 60. 60, yeah. Average Sunday attendance. So thank you again, Brendan, for that. What we'd like to do now is just dig a bit deeper into the key vestry responsibilities that Brendan laid out a moment ago, beginning with the idea that the vestry has an important role in discerning God's mission and vision for the congregation today. A little earlier, we mentioned the surveys that ECF conducted and concluded in 2014. One of the things we discovered there was that many congregations are struggling with questions of purpose. What does it mean to be an Episcopal congregation today? Who is God calling your local congregation to be? As tempting as it might be to reach or provide a ready-made answer, more and more congregations are realizing that the answer to these questions have to come from themselves. Each Episcopal congregation is different, and each will have their own unique way of responding to God's call. So what we can suggest then are some ways of getting to the why. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a cartoon of a first-time vestry member surprised to see Jesus and Bible study at the top of the vestry meeting agenda. The caption reads, "First-time vestry member suddenly realizes tonight's vestry meeting is about more than just the budget." It is about more than just the budget. We strongly believe that vestries need to understand their role as faith leaders of the congregation, holding the Bible in one hand and the annual operating budget in the other. And one way that Episcopal congregations are doing this is by placing faith formation at the top of the agenda. Oftentimes this takes the form of a Bible study or a period of prayer and reflection. That's one simple change. In larger congregations, congregations are experimenting with a structural change, which includes forming a small property and finance committee, which is directly overseen by the vestry. This committee is made up of people who are absolutely passionate about finance and property issues, and makes recommendations to the vestry about many of the day-to-day operational issues affecting the life of the congregation. And what this does is it frees vestry meetings to focus more of their time on strategic, bigger picture issues in which they explore, how their congregation is going to respond to these various issues in light of God's call to the congregation today. So I saw that there were a few questions kind of popping in the chat box. Brendan, I'm wondering if you can just let me know, or if we want to respond at this moment to them.
Sure. I think we may want to kind of press on a little bit before kind of reverting back to some other topics.
Okay, great. So so that sort of summarizes very briefly focus on strategic mission and vision. A second key responsibility that vestries have is identifying and forming the next generation of leaders. And this is really true, or especially true, for junior and senior wardens. And again, Brendan mentioned just a moment ago that we will very shortly be having a webinar on senior warden ministry. And the two presenters are going to be speaking about the importance of this component of their role. But vestries as a whole have this responsibility as well. So what do we mean by identifying the next generation of leadership for the church? Let's start with the canons. Vestries have a canonical role in electing new rectors and also identifying postulants for holy orders. But in addition to these canonical responsibilities, vestry members, and perhaps the wardens especially, as I said, have the job of identifying people who have leadership potential for the wider congregation. So how are vestry members joining with the clergy in keeping an eye out for individuals who can serve the congregation in a new way? Of course, many of you have just completed or are completing a nomination and election process. While these processes differ from parish to parish and diocese to diocese, what we want to emphasize here is that it's really critical for vestries to take a proactive role in identifying potential new members for the vestry throughout the year. Deliberate nomination processes take into account the extent to which someone is really excited about the mission and vision of the congregation, and it engages gifts, skills, and passions of the person. Lastly, I think there's a lot that we can borrow as Episcopal congregations from the world of community organizing, and one tool that's especially useful, I think, is what's called doing one-on-ones. One-on-ones are a very helpful way of getting vestry members to be proactive about searching for people with significant leadership potential. Conducting a one-on-one involves grabbing a coffee with someone, taking time to explore their gifts and talents, and asking for a commitment. And whether that's a small commitment, such as we would really love to see you on church next Sunday, or to the other end, such as would you consider serving on said committee, or serving as a potential vestry member or standing for election for this. Another adage from community organizing is want something done, ask a busy person. It's just a note that people who are heavily involved in community activities are oftentimes, though not always, oftentimes folks who follow through on their commitments. And you want to plant that seed early about the possibility of serving in either the coming year or down the road. And last but not least, in no way least, of the 4 vestry responsibilities, do we come to the issue of property and finance. And again, this is oftentimes what many people think are the primary responsibilities of the vestries. Vestries are required to be good stewards of property and resources, creating financially sustainable, vital congregations. These legal and canonical responsibilities are very important. and those responsibilities need to be put in context of broader mission and vision of the congregation. That's why we place discernment of mission and vision first, because property, money, staff, these are all resources for living out that mission and vision. So we could, and oftentimes do, spend an entire webinar discussing what is just on this page, but I do have a few highlights. First and foremost, vestries has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that proper asset and financial management and oversight is taking place, and this is oftentimes approached through the annual audit, the required annual audit. Another issue that is coming up, a lot of congregations are wrestling with and engaging, is addressing income streams. The issue oftentimes of using rentable space or air rights in the city as a source of income. There's, of course, the annual stewardship campaign, and if you're a small congregation, the vestry may have a particular hand in running the annual stewardship campaign. If you're a larger or medium-sized congregation, there's sometimes a committee that handles the stewardship campaign. But either way, because it falls under the role of fiduciary responsibility, you are invested with the responsibility of making sure that that's a successful campaign. Of course, for congregations, there are periodic capital campaigns to address everything from debt to building maintenance to construction. And then lastly, ECF strongly believes that whether you're a small or large congregation, it's great to create a plan giving program to begin or grow an endowment. Then, of course, for those who already have an endowment, it may be good to think about how you structure those so that they're most effective. Finally, another issue is that vestries have to consider is liability. Vestries are the legal board of directors of congregations, and what that means is spelled out not only by the canons but by state law. So if someone slips and falls, the vestry has legal liability, and you have to make sure that this is addressed through director's insurance but also other forms of insurance as well. Lastly, this is not listed in our top 4 vestry responsibilities. It's more a question of process, really. One of the things that vestries do is meet. They meet regularly. And so it is well worth our while as vestry members to think about how the meetings take place and making sure that they are meaningful and helpful experiences for everyone. So we think that tweaking the agenda, again, has a significant impact on the effectiveness and quality of vestry meetings. Vestries, we believe, of course, need to meet regularly and retreat regularly. They can be seen as opportunities to get to know one another, opportunities to discuss big picture issues, opportunities to do some discernment and strategic planning, and some of the strategic planning work that we've talked about a lot in this presentation. Another tool that's really helpful, that helps kind of set some parameters around how vestries work together, is effective covenants and norms, also sometimes called ground rules. Some example covenants and norms include: we expect this vestry to start our meetings on time. We expect people to attend regularly. We expect people who are not going to be able to attend a meeting to alert the chair or the rector so that we know what's coming down we know what our attendance is going to be. We expect people to listen with an open mind and open heart. We expect people to disagree in an appropriate and Christian way. One of the things that many vestries do is hold a retreat at the beginning of the year. And one of the items on the agenda for these retreats is just discussing some behavioral norms or some norms for how the group is going to meet together. It's a really important thing, and oftentimes is a great way to set the start one's work. And later in the year, God forbid, maybe you're having some conflicts or some disagreements. It's a wonderful thing to point back to and say, hey, we all agreed that we would work in this manner. We've already spoken about the two following points. Again, while the clergy is always the presiding officer, this doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be the meeting facilitator. Indeed, in typical parliamentary fashion, if a rector or clergy wants to take on the role of a facilitator or speaker for a particular meeting, the appointed meeting chair can hand over that responsibility for that session. Also, we've talked a lot about beginning with spiritual practices, so I'll move on to the next point here. The last few points have to do with what we prioritize on our agenda. Remember that cartoon where a vestry member was surprised to find Jesus and Bible study at the top of the agenda? In some cases, it can be as simple as working on that change over time. Now, I realize that this is the time when congregations who haven't yet had their annual meetings are working on their annual budgets. So perhaps at this moment, it may make sense to spend a bulk of time on something like the budget. But if there are more routine reports, if it was a good month and buildings and grounds are in shape and the committee met and they decided to paint the youth room, the building committee can write a written report which is emailed to the vestry, read by the vestry members before the meeting, and then accepted or moved to discussion through a consent agenda process. Brendan, I'm wondering if you can offer the link for information on the consent agenda process in the chat box. So in lieu of spending a lot of time reviewing these regular reports, you can really then spend time discussing those bigger picture conversations that require decisions for the vestry at that time. An example of a bigger picture issue might be, the neighborhood is changing, how will we respond to this in 2016? Or another such issue that gets to the heart of who you are in the congregation. Okay, Brendan and I have been speaking for quite a while now, and so I would love to just pause for a few comments or questions. And again, the chat box is on the lower right-hand side of the screen. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear if this is resonating with your experience. If you completely disagree, that's also welcome. We'd love to hear that. Suzanne, thank you. What is the consent agenda? Just above your comment, Brendan has included a link to a resource on consent agendas. Basically, it's a method by which, and that resource will describe it in a much better way than what I'm going to do right now. But basically, it's a method by which, let's say, the committees of the church can send in their reports ahead of time, typically at least a week in advance. Vestry members will review those reports, and then the consenting to all those reports will be listed as a single item on the agenda. If someone feels very, very strongly that they want to move that out of the consent agenda into discussion, then that's what the vestry person so moves. What it does is it then eliminates the need to read the reports during a vestry meeting, discuss and consent each one, and instead sort of puts them under an umbrella consent item unless it's moved out and placed into discussion.
Thanks, Miguel. One question that came up earlier that I haven't addressed yet in the chat box, and I'd love to highlight, is James had asked earlier about how much do responsibilities differ between vestries and bishops' committees. I confess that I am not exactly sure about that answer, but to my knowledge, and if anybody else has anything to share about this, please chime in with that, is that the responsibilities are pretty much identical, save perhaps some reporting differences that take place in different dioceses. And namely, that comes down to, and that for those who may not know the difference between a vestry or bishop's committee, which are the two most commonly used terms for the structures, that a vestry is for a congregation that is financially self-sustaining, and the bishop's committee is for a mission congregation that receives financial support from the diocese. And thus the bishop is de facto the one who's still in charge of the congregation, and the clergy person acts as their representative to the parish in terms of the governing body. So there may be some reporting differences in terms of, especially when it comes to the financial aspect of that, but to my knowledge that in most dioceses, the responsibilities are just the same when it comes to the membership of those.
Great. Great. Similar question, I think, tied to that is, what are the differences between priest in charge and rector?
Again, a very similar sort of setup. In this case, a priest in charge is not a permanent position appointment. Typically, that is done in a transition situation. This can be in a parish or a mission. But say your rector has been there for 20 years, and may want to take a little bit of a breather before immediately jumping into the transition process. A priest in charge can be appointed. Or if there has been severe conflict in a congregation and the leadership has left, or something like that has happened, a priest in charge can be appointed. So that can be done in agreement with the bishop, or the bishop can come in and appoint a priest in charge. But that just basically denotes literally that this is the priest that is in charge at the moment in the congregation, while the rector is there permanently, or for that term of their job, not permanently.
I see Tom's question, do vestries follow Robert's Rules of Orders? And I think the answer is it depends, and it depends largely, oftentimes, on even the section of the agenda that's taking place. So Robert's Rules of Order may not be used during a section in which there's perhaps a general discussion or a discernment process. But in a business session in which there is going to be voting and a quorum needs to be held, that can be kind of bracketed by moving into use of Robert's Rules of Orders. I'd actually love to, this is something that varies pretty significantly across vestries, so I'd love to hear from other participants how and when they use Robert's Rules of Orders as well.
Sue had made a comment a little bit earlier asking us if we had any comments on the duties of non-voting members, for example, the treasurer and the clerk. If you had any, I guess, specific questions about that, that would be very helpful. I guess I would be curious to know what you're hoping to get at with that. But I guess the thing at least at the top of my tongue that I would say to that is to make sure that their roles and responsibilities, like vestry members in general, and that we would espouse that everybody has a very clear job description, and particularly for non-voting members that have a very clear sense of why their position is non-voting, but why how does their role and their ministry fit into the bigger picture, and is there a term for this position? Is there not? How is this set up? What goes into their role within both the congregation and within the vestry?
There is dissent about what we are allowed to add to the discussion. That's one occasion when Robert's rules can get a bit sticky. Yes, the vestry treasurer and clerks and members that is allowed to vote. Great. Should we move on to the great.
We will make sure we get back to questions in a little bit, but in knowing that we have a few more things to cover, we'll flip over to this, but keep the questions coming in the chat box. We'll return back to some of those comments and questions that were there before we wrap up this evening. Just some tools and resources for you to consider. Would just present to you this list and espouse you to take a look at this and reflect on things that you may want to put together for your vestry. As we covered, the importance of keeping those canons of the Episcopal Church, and your diocese should have those offhand even if you're not referencing them all the time. You may also want to look into getting a copy of your local state nonprofit laws. Sometimes when those tricky legal things pop up, it may be helpful for you to be able to have those there, or if you're ever in doubt about something. As well as your copy of your bylaws. If you haven't seen them, I would encourage you to look for them and find them. If you don't have them, I would strongly recommend that you develop them. And always check with your diocese about what congregations have to incorporate in theirs, because your diocesan canons are going to be conform with your local state nonprofit laws. So typically, if you go by those, you'll be in good shape. Also, be sure to have the mission statements, vision statements too, for your congregation and perhaps for your diocese as well. Maybe look into some of the history of your congregation and community. We'll be covering a resource for your community demographics and trends, but definitely that's a useful tool for members. Perhaps present those to new folks. The Book of Common Prayer, of course, is one of our main staples for prayer and for worship, to have that offhand at vestry meetings present. Perhaps make sure you keep those on the table with you. And last but certainly not least, the Bible. And I like to say this in all of our vestry presentations, that I cannot commend to you enough to read the Bible, and that to remember that as a leader in your congregation, as a Christian, and particularly as a leader within a Christian community, reading the Bible is essential and is not an option for us, that you should be inwardly taking in the Scripture as frequently as possible, and especially at meetings, and especially when it comes time to making important decisions. We also would like to put forward to you as a tool to possibly use our newly revised and updated Vestry Resource Guide. It was just published this past summer and released in July. It comes with great topics relevant to congregations now, including being a mission-focused vestry, how to build up strong lay clergy teams, that visioning and strategic thinking that is so important for so many congregations nowadays, and also looking at stewardship and how that relates to vision, and many other great topics. There are great resources within this book, including things, items for being able to develop a covenant, commissioning your new vestry members. Lots and lots of great stuff on there. Check it out and order from Forward Movement directly. The information is right up there on your screen, or from your local favorite Episcopal bookseller too. The Manual of Business Methods in Church Affairs. This can be a bit of a dense tool, but is nonetheless an important one that I highly recommend to you, especially for those of you who are on the financial committee, in any way dealing with the budget, anyway, a treasurer especially. This is going to have really important stuff for you. Beyond financial, including financial items, also general record keeping for your congregation is included in here, as far as the recommendations for how long should you be keeping various documents. There's a really great guide at the end of this manual for you to be able to check and see maybe it's time to purge some of those files, And maybe there are some things you can put to archive and other things that you may need to be keeping offhand for a very long time, if not permanently. So definitely take a look at that if you are involved in any ways administratively or financially within your congregation. As mentioned, and as mentioned by one of our, in the comments as well by some participant on our webinar this evening, a really fabulous resource that's free and available to every single congregation is from the Episcopal Church's Office of Research. You can find specifically on the Studying Your Congregation and Community page a parish report that provides you a snapshot of the past 11 years. So right now that is going from 2004 through 2014. The information is derived from your parochial reports, which you may note are coming due in a couple of months. So that information gets put in, compiled, and then usually updated in the fall. So 2015, you should expect, will probably be updated in the fall of this year. But it's a great barometer. It's not necessarily going to point to specifics, but use this as a guide, and it's a helpful snapshot for you to look at for your membership, average Sunday attendance, and your pledge and plate. There's also a community profile report that looks at a 3-mile radius around your congregation. This may be more useful in some congregations than others, but again, this contains a lot of interesting information, and some of that can be gleaned to be able to use in your congregational setting. So check it out. It's links up there on the screen, and take a look at that and pass it along to other members of your vestry.
Great, thank you. So let's take all this information that we presented and try to boil it down into some practical next steps for you to consider. And we present these 2 slides, obviously with the understanding that no one's going to do all of them, but rather people are most likely going to choose 1 or 2 to do next while. One thing that we want to suggest is, again, just research your diocesan canons to see if youth can be elected to serve on your vestry and what the parameters are for that. Look at the size of your vestry. Would increasing or decreasing this number of elected members be helpful? One interesting little statistic that comes from the field of leadership studies is just that the number 10. The number 10 seems to be a good maximum number for a team, especially a leadership team. And once you start to get to 11 or 12, things start to not be quite as strong in a variety of ways. So that's just something to bear in mind. Brendan mentioned thinking about the size of your vestry also in relationship to the size of your congregation. Who's presiding at the vestry meetings? It's not just a question of whether you're clergy or not. Is it someone who is passionate about facilitating meetings? Is it someone who's really skilled at that? Are there other ways in which that could be done? Secondly, of course, review canonical requirements and liabilities associated with being a vestry member. Over time, move the focus of vestry meetings toward discernment of God's mission, and then begin regular vestry meetings with an extended period of prayer, Bible study, or other practice. Just a few moments ago, Rebecca Myers in the chat box, I think, gave a really nice order of how her vestry meetings are structured. You might want to scroll up just a bit and see how they're doing so. Moving on to the next slide, of course, finances is a big concern for many congregations, and one of the responsibilities includes certainly reviewing sources of income and thinking about other sources of income streams. One thing that we did not mention specifically, but I would highly recommend, is a past webinar called The Basics of Parish Finances. This webinar was done once, so we have one good recording, by Jerry Kuchar, who was formerly the Director of Finance of the Diocese of New York. And it's a 1-hour webinar that just simply provides an overview of signs of health and signs of concern when looking at parish finances. It's excellent. It's also one of the most viewed webinars that we have in our library, and I would highly recommend it. Skipping just ahead, again, create or revise the Vestry Covenant at the next Vestry retreat. I hope that maybe whether it's a formal retreat or you're going off-site or staying in the congregation, I hope that at some point at the beginning of this year there will be an opportunity for Vestry members to get to know one another and to articulate, to get to know some of the key issues that are facing the congregation, and in some ways to also name a few norms for how they will work together over the course of the year. And then lastly, Brendan just finished presenting a wonderful set of resources, and it would be great to be able to hand new Vestry members a toolbox of resources as they begin, so that they're fully resourced in the start. With that, should we pause again for comments?
So we still have some time still, so we'd love to have any more questions, look at the potential next steps. If you have any sort of thoughts or trying to figure out where am I going to go for next step, now's a great time to start wrestling with some of that. We had another question from Jean asking about sort of vestry size. Definitely make sure you check with your diocesan canons in terms of the size. I can't say, go for this number, because that will determine, sort of the minimum number of people who may be elected. In most cases, I would say that's probably 6 members. And if you're allowed to downsize your vestry, if you're currently, say, at 12 people, especially if you have if you have 70 people in your congregation, it may make sense to decrease down to more like 6 or 7 people rather than trying to get 12 people. But check that out first. When in doubt, call your diocese to try and hunt down that information.
Yeah, wonderful comment from CT. Ours is about the same size, and we have 5 vestry members, which is a good working number. It makes it a lot more sustainable come time for nomination and election processes at the end of each year.
And Suzanne has a question asking, does anyone know when the updated 2015 Constitution canons will be published? I don't know. If somebody does know, that would be great. We would love to know.
Yeah. I seem to be remembering that those are typically published in the summer, if I'm not mistaken.
I really can't remember for sure.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for the group. One of the things, again, one of the canonical responsibilities that's listed for vestries, and it's sometimes that one of the ones that doesn't necessarily get looked at very often, is around this whole role of identifying new leaders. I would love to hear, first of all, if there are vestries that make identifying new lay leaders for leadership responsibilities in the congregation a priority, and secondly, if so, how you go about doing that work. I mean, is it oftentimes it's informal, but is that made a priority in and discussed at vestry meetings?
And while some folks are typing, okay, it just came up there. Is the new Vestry Resource Guide available for purchase in digital format? Yes, thank you for bringing that up, because I failed to mention that. The new Vestry Resource Guide is available both as a book, which you can get from many different vendors, as well as an ebook. If you go onto the Forward Movement site, you can click through to the ebook vendors that are available for the new Vestry Resource Guide. It's also available in both English and Spanish, and you can get both of English and Spanish in both print and ebook forms. Thank you, Miguel.
Very much. So yes, we have an intentional nomination process. Generally, people who have been involved and committed in worship and in other ministry activities throughout the year, generally those who have been invited to run end up elected and have been doing a wonderful job. Wonderful. Yes. A wide variety of experiences on this front. Yeah. I'll say for myself, I'm not a vestry member this year at the parish, but recently I was visiting a parish and walked to the back after the service, and the senior warden was standing at the back of the parish with a name tag and sort of serving there as a greeter. And her role, and she was very engaged and wonderful about this, was to engage newcomers, ask how they became involved, and really start to kind of point people toward various ministries. And it was a very informal sort of conversation. It was not a lengthy sort of process, but I thought it was so effective because it was one-on-one. Again, it was informal. It was just done in a sort of coffee hour sort of setting, and it really made a connection, I thought, between newcomer, visitor to the parish, as well as someone who's been there and is deeply invested. It's just something to consider as a very simple way of keeping an eye out for new leaders. Great. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for all your comments and questions. There are a number of other upcoming ECF webinars which we'd love to have you attend. Investment strategies for endowment and invested funds for 2016, and certainly if you're watching the market in any sort of way, I think they're rewriting that presentation as we speak. And it's probably something on many, many people's minds. Secondly, Senior Warden Ministry, Mission Impossible. I really, really want to advocate that if you're a Senior Warden, you attend this. I just finished doing the dress rehearsal with the two presenters, and they've done an excellent job. They've both served as Senior Wardens in the past and speak not just about the official responsibilities of senior wardens, but also about the unofficial and sort of nitty-gritty role that a person takes on, especially during a clergy transition. So they've had the full range of experiences serving as a senior warden, and I really, again, highly recommend that presentation. And then lastly, choosing a planned giving shepherd for your Episcopal, for your church or Episcopal entity. We have a new program which we have a new program which sort of encapsulates our planned giving resources into an online format, and this is a sort of informational webinar about that, as well as how to identify a leader within your congregation. Jean has just asked, are all webinars on Thursdays? They are not. Typically, we do them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We avoid Wednesdays as much as possible because Wednesdays is when vestries meet and other groups in church meet. But Tuesdays and Thursdays is our usual date. All right. Lastly, if this is our contact information, we'd love to hear from you. Uh, Again, visit our website, our publication, and call us as well if you'd ever like to. In just a moment, you will be receiving a survey in your email, and we would love for you to just take a moment to offer some feedback about tonight's presentation. What worked, what didn't? We're always trying to improve, so we welcome both topics.
Again, thank you everyone for attending. We wish you all the best in your ministry on the vestry. God bless, Godspeed, and good night.
Night.